It's happening all the time in yoga. It's happening all the time in Tai Chi. It's happening all the time in Kung Fu. It even happens a lot shifting side to side, weight bearing, 1 foot, all that in Qigong. So I think that what we've kind of got to get over is the whole idea that these things are special in some way other than the fact that they come from a culture which has named them a certain way and then acculturated them in certain ways. But if we pull the kind of pull off the cloak of acculturation, what do we have is body practice, mind practice, breath practice, and massage as the 4 dimensions of any kind of mind body practice from any culture. So then if we drill in to but what? Like what? Well, you got a neurological system you've got a consciousness which making choices. Those choices then get directed. My choice is to sit and watch TV. Okay, there's whatever comes out of that. And then my choice is to do yoga. Okay, then there's whatever comes out of that.
You got into yoga, what was it, in the early 1970s?
1963.
1963. Lilias Folan, is that right? Is that her name?
Yeah, Lilias Yoga and You on public television.
And how did you come across that? And what was that a yoga experience like off public television?
Well, I think I was probably like 16 or something like that years old. And I was skipping school and watching TV all day, like, you do when you do. And I don't know, I was just intrigued, by, I was right in that same area. I bumped into Alan Watts, a great philosopher from the 60s who was into Zen and Taoism and so forth. And I was also running with a group of people who bumped into the transcendental meditation crowd. It was like early days of that. Like probably I got into transcendental meditation in about the same year that the Beatles did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very mystical, and I'm from Ohio, so we were pretty much on the edge to be like Alan Watts and transcendental meditation. And so when yoga came on television, I thought, okay, let's check this out. And I wasn't really what I would call a daily practitioner or any of that. All that sort of ramped up later in life, but it's the yoga of every shamanic culture has its own name. And I feel like I was kind of tapping into some sort of archetypal curiosity that didn't really have to do with yoga or Chinese anything or Native American, which I later got lots and lots of really beautiful experiences with Native American medicine people and shamans and so forth. So I don't know. I was just like inclined to those kinds of things.
I was going to ask, what kind of 16-year-old in 1963 just drops into transcendental meditation and Alan Watts and yoga on TV? I mean, that's and you mentioned you were having fun as a 16-year-old, but what was your family into any of this stuff leading up to those moments, or is it just something that struck you? Had you had a propensity, for anything spiritual prior to that, or adventure? Who were you?
Yeah, there was a seminal moment, as there is, for everybody in their trajectory towards, the fullness of life. And for me, that was a couple of troubling experiences. One was that when I was 9 years old, my father died of leukemia. Big deal. Of course, I was, trying to be as groovy as possible at the time. So I made up like it didn't matter. But apparently it did, because I I became a bad boy. I started smoking when I was like 10 years old. And, when I got into high school, I got kicked off of a bunch of my athletic teams. I don't think it was because I was not fit as an athlete. I think it was that I was a kind of distressed personality. When I got kicked off the basketball team, it was because the coach said that we're going to practice on Friday, the Friday after Thanksgiving. And I was into like Friday is free. And I was grumping, from the sidelines and and so forth. And so that just all snowballed. And then when I got to college, I was in one of those fraternities, and for for reasons that I've analyzed over and over and have no idea whether it's true, I got kicked out of my fraternity. So I was constantly being sidelined. And interestingly enough, the day that I got kicked out of my fraternity, here we are, we're guys talking. So, like, how many guys out there, struggled with being an athlete? How many guys out there struggled with, social this and that? And how many guys, figured out the perfect way to be able to, be the groovy dude? And how many guys didn't? And, I was one of the ones who did not. And the event was that everybody was drunk, and the guy who should have gotten kicked out, who was like spewing, standing on a table and barfing on the people around him, they made him the president of the fraternity.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think they had a complaint from somewhere, so I had to figure out somebody to be the scapegoat and so forth. And so, but the net on all of that is navigating what one can and what one cannot control. And I think that's the foundation of all the archetypal portals into the spiritual world, where you are entertained by and invited to investigate the relationship between what can and cannot be controlled. And so my dad dies, I can't control it. I get kicked off the basketball team because the former Marine, who was like always shouting at everybody, decided to, make somebody into the story of how you better get in line. And so, like, sometimes people say, oh, it's so sad your dad died when you were a little kid. Yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, that was like one of the most important things that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And I look back on that, and I actually have said thousands and thousands of times a kind of appreciation to my father for being willing to basically live out his life in the way that he did, so that I could be influenced by those events the way I was, so that I could then become predisposed to being a kind of an outlier, which then led me to, taking refuge in these beautiful ideas that exist in our society, or in world society, from the great wisdom traditions.
Yeah. In some ways, you have to be you're you're thrown off the path in some way. And all of a sudden, if you are asking questions, you eventually find a thread back to the path. And that usually is where these things start becoming more visible and recognizable. And then you just see more and more connections, and that's where it takes you. But the sort of being tossed off your path, whether you're a kid or whether you're just a teenager or you're an adult, is a very unconscious thing that happens. And you may not have signed up for it if you had a choice, but regardless, that imprint, that shift in the universe sent you moving in a different direction. And it's a ton of growth working your way back.
May I just say one more thing, is that those experiences, so I had a bunch of buddies in high school, and those experiences freed me in a way that a couple of my very best friends were not freed. And I think of these two characters. One was named Jay and the other one was named Ken. And there was a point at which we were all charging with like incredible enthusiasm into our futures with a kind of light-hearted rebelliousness. And I just remember there was a point where these two guys whose fathers did live to that point, where these guys were, it's like we were charging forward, and it turned out these two had leashes on. And have you ever seen a dog that's just rushing for something and then reaches the end of the leash, tring, and I just kept going. And these two dear friends were just halted in their what I would call their spiritual growth, while I was catapulted by my own tragedies into, being really interested in, how do we get here and why do people die, and, who's the winner, and, did the person who died youngest, was that person a loser in some way, and what did they do wrong, or what was wrong with the world, and just everything about what we could call karma, destiny, samsara, obscurations, just all the stuff that piles on for us then to, somehow plant our roots into and then fertilize ourselves to the point where we can shoot up some kind of beautiful fruit-bearing self.
Where were you at school?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
That's where you went to college?
Yeah, I actually started in pre-med at University of Cincinnati, Ohio, and I discovered the medical industrial complex right away when I asked who is going to teach us about disease prevention. And what I learned from everybody who was in charge of medical school was, well, we're doctors. We diagnose and treat diseases. And so if you want to learn about health or preventing diseases, you have to pursue some other discipline, because doctors don't do that. And I thought it was kind of revealing, that was sort of like that was the party line so let's see, when I started in college would have been 1966 maybe, for me to be able to discover that the pharmaceutical industrial complex and the medical instruments manufacturing industrial complex had already taken over what we in this society continue to call healthcare, which is like, if you wait until a person has a diagnosable process, have a diagnosis in place, and then pursue resolving that diagnosis through pharmaceuticals and surgeries, how is that healthcare? So, I just figured that out right away. And that's how I ended up dropping out of medical school, growing my hair down to the sidewalk, doing a lot of deep breathing. And transferring out of medical school into comparative world literature, where one of the first books that we read was called the Tao Te Ching, which is the ancient Chinese philosophical, way before the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which I'm also very familiar with, preceding it by maybe even like 600-700 years. Beautiful declarations of the nature of life and the interaction between a person and a cosmos. Back to you. Did I answer the question?
So go ahead, Larry. Do you have a question?
No, I was just imagining this young character on his adventure in 1967. What a fertile time
in
for
Ohio,
these explorations in Ohio. Yeah,
I know, of all places, Ohio, right? You'd think out in California. So Roger, did you make this shift to make this shift in Ohio, or did you leave Ohio as you were making this shift?
I am so glad you asked me this. This is a classic 60s story. So, as you know, this all was happening to me in Ohio. But in 1967, my best friend and I, one of the ones who reached the end of his leash, he reached the end of his leash in 1968. In 1967, we were all still just charging full force. And you guys probably don't remember this, but there would be, on Saturday morning, there would always be this radio show, which is called the Top 10 or something like that, where you would hear the top 10 songs, music songs, dance songs, whatever you would call it, whatever teenagers were paying attention to. And this song came in the radio called, I don't know what the name of the song was, but I've never forgotten the line in the song, which is said, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear flowers in your hair. And I looked at my buddy and he looked at me and he said, and I said, and so we actually hitchhiked from Cincinnati, Ohio to San Francisco. And our mothers were standing on the front porch as we walked away, crying and saying things like, you'll never be the same. And, please come back alive, all that stuff. And we were just like liberated into, and so when we got to San Francisco, it was that's what they call the summer of love. And in recent years, I saw a documentary about the summer of love, and basically what it was, there was a chart in like 1963, 1964, 1965, 1966, a very slow upticking of, what we would call rock and roll and younger people in San Francisco, acting out and, smoking lots of reefer and doing, LSD and so forth. And in 1967, the line goes straight up, and it peaks at, and I saw this on it's like real data from a real documentary about this phenomena. On June 20, right around June 21st, which is the summer solstice, just by a kind of coincidence, this line peaks. And so my friend and I got to San Francisco right around that day, maybe like June 20th, 21st, 22nd, something like that. And it was scary for kids from common neighborhoods in a place called Cincinnati. There was a lot of drugs going on. There were a lot of people our age who did not look like they were well. And there was no place to sleep. Well, we'd been hitchhiking for like a week, and we had all the equipment we needed to just sleep in Golden Gate Park, so no problem. But we figured out like this is too spooky. And when you would walk by people who were on the street, they'd say like, you know, heroin and cocaine and and we were like hardly even getting started on our pot smoking careers. And
Right.
so we decided to split, and we went back across the Oakland Bridge to Berkeley. And Berkeley was awesome. And we moved into a, you know, commune sort of place. And there was a guy who was living in the commune who was studying with Ali Akbar Khan, who was like the great Indian sarod player. And we would have these community dinners. There'd be like 100 people there. And then these characters would like practice their tablas and their bansuris and their sitars and their sarods. It was like dreamland. So, you
That's
know,
awesome.
that's what happened. And
That is
it
awesome.
was quite seminal. The next year, 1968, I went back. I did the same thing, went back. My friend, he reached the end of his leash. His dad reeled him in. And so I was kind of on my own out there at that point. And big
And so
start.
at this point, when you, where did you start shifting more on the trajectory of Qigong, Tai Chi, getting into getting your OMD?
Yeah. So while I'm living in Berkeley in 1967, I got a job at this Institute for Educational Resources or something like that. And I would pack boxes and ship out testing materials and so forth. And I went past this park every day on my way to work. And right over there were these people who looked like they were floating. And I thought, you know, what is that? And then a couple of times I stopped. And one time I stepped a little closer, and the guy who was leading the class waved me in. And so this was a Chinese gentleman who was a student at Berkeley Engineering. He didn't have much in the way of what you would call Tai Chi philosophy, but he could easily speak to things like step forward, step back, left, right, take a deep breath, you know, all that just very practical kind of talk. And he would just do the practice and we would all follow. And it was mesmerizing. And one of the things that was super mesmerizing about it, and a real power theme that I think we can bring to the yoga discussion as well, is he never corrected anybody. And there's a lot of you know, in the Chinese tradition there's a spectrum. It's true in India too. Like if you look carefully in India, there is a kung fu. I forget what it's called. And yoga is kind of like Tai Chi, but you know, in Tai Chi you stand up and you float around and so forth. And in yoga, often you're unless it's Iyengar, you're you know, on a mat and etc. And then over on the, you know, quiescent side, shall we say, is meditation. So from kung fu to meditation, and there's a lot of master teachers, or what do we want to call these gurus, who are very insistent that one do this practice or these practices or whatever practices it might be succinctly as described by the teacher. And there are others who just allow for a natural growth into a self-awareness that ultimately leads to, shall we say, a more succinct personal expression of the practice. So I was influenced immediately by this freedom that this teacher allowed for. And of course, I was still reading Alan Watts and the Tao Te Ching, and so that really got me into the Tai Chi part. And if we go back to that spectrum from Kung Fu and gymnastics on one side to quiescent stillness on the other side, Tai Chi is in the middle. And then if you go towards the quiescent side, there's all kinds of what we would call Chinese yoga, or what the Chinese call Qigong. And if you go to the other side, it trends towards things like, martial arts and gymnastics and so forth. So I was super drawn into the whole idea that there's this spectrum of how the body is woven with the breath practice and the meditation in different iterations of what we would call dynamism, from dynamic to quiescent being the spectrum.
So, Roger, what is Qigong and what is Tai Chi?
Let me answer one other thing first. How do we get to Chinese medicine? How do we get to being a Chinese medicine doctor as opposed to the kind of doctor that I decided not to get to? And that is that the Chinese medicine has 4 parts. And by the way, it's just a knockoff of Ayurveda, or you could say that Ayurveda is a knockoff of Chinese medicine. There's a big mountain between the two, and all these shamanic cultures are evolving at similar pacing. And, when the snow melts in the springs and the Silk Road is open, the Chinese are coming south and the people from India are going north and so forth. So there's a lot of merging.
Ideas are moving around, right?
Beautiful, beautiful concepts moving around. And so I like the Chinese one because, well, first of all, because it linked itself to Tai Chi and Kung Fu, which I was very interested in. And there are 4 parts. So herbal medicine and massage, those go back, probably 300,000 years. And then acupuncture, which is a very latter day development around the year 0 on the common calendar. So while herbs and massage have existed for, probably at least 100,000, maybe more years, acupuncture is like a latecomer. It's like a new innovation around the year 0 on the common calendar. And then the 4th part is, did I say massage already?
You did.
So yeah, herbs, massage, acupuncture, and then everything else. So that's going to be nutrition and sleep and meditation and Qigong and Tai Chi. So that's how the magnet of the Chinese model kind of pulled me in. And so then your question was, would you say that again?
Yeah, just what is Tai Chi and Qigong for those who really have never wrapped their head around it?
Sure. So remember, we have our spectrum from Kung Fu to meditation. And so both Qigong and Tai Chi are, shall we say, on that spectrum. And Tai Chi, let's go to Qigong. Qigong is developed by the Chinese so long ago that nobody Nobody knows. So we average that out to somewhere around 100 to 300,000 years ago. Why? Because the human gene is 3 million years. And so when we think of the human diaspora from wherever it came from, whether it's from Africa or whether it's aliens or whatever it is that gets humans to move about, there are these tribes that are rising up in Asia. And so the underlying feature of the nature of the world is qi, just as the underlying feature of the nature of the world in India is prana. And so then everything grows from there. So everything about Chinese medicine grows from there. Everything about Chinese philosophy grows from there. Everything about Chinese mathematics grows from there. Every kind of science in China that there could have been, like proto-science or whatever you want to call it, arises from there. And so qi is that, an invisible resource that is ubiquitous throughout the cosmos. So not just throughout the body, and not just throughout the neighborhood, and not just throughout the planet, but throughout the cosmos, and a ubiquitous presence of some sort of something that's knowable in a very abstract way of knowing that underlines absolutely everything. So then Gong means to work with or play with or cultivate or anything along the line of paying attention to and engaging with. So in other words, Qigong is paying attention to or engaging with the underlying ubiquitous resource of the cosmos within myself and my relations, because why not? I mean, once I figure out that this is how I work, then I'm going to start noticing that this is how the seasons work. I'm going to notice that it's how my relatives work and my friends work, and how everything works. You know, how everything works is going to have this qi thing somehow infused into it. So the difference between that, which is speculated to be 300,000 years or so, because think of it this way: if the human gene is 3 million and we come from apes or something like that, then were those apes talking to each other? Well, yeah, animals are talking to each other all the time. So at what point then did we develop a somewhat refined language about how we feel and what we need and how to arrange things so that we can get what we need, and how we can arrange things to be able to modify purposefully how we feel? Both feeling, two definitions for feeling: how I feel physically and how I feel emotionally. So Tai Chi is actually a phenomena. If you see that circle with the yin and the yang in it, that's called, colloquially, that's called the yin yang circle or yin yang symbol. But in China, that is a map of the world that we live in. So if we think about the world that we live in, one of the key insights about how it works is that items separate themselves in space. So I am separate from the light right there. I'm separate from the tree outside my window. I'm even separate from my spouse, and I'm separate from you guys. And so how is separateness defined, how is definitively revealed? Well, it's revealed by the fact that there's an item here, and then there's a space, and then there's an item there. And that is, at the bottom, that's what's called duality. And the Tai Chi symbol with the white part and the dark part is basically a map of the foundational arrangement of the world that we experience, which shows up as space-time, or whatever you want to call that. And so that concept of Tai Chi, describing the nature of the world, goes back way beyond the beginning of Tai Chi as an exercise. And so what did it mean? Well, that picture means the world and all the implications about it. It's gorgeous and really insightful and super poetic, and it applies in every aspect of how the world works. But then later, in around the year 1600, which is only 400 years ago, and earliest idea about Tai Chi as an exercise might be earlier than that. So we'll take it back 200 years and go to 1400, 600 years ago. Somebody starts calling a form of Qigong Tai Chi, because all of these practices have these three things in common: body practice, breath practice, and mind clearing practice. Body, mind, and breath. They also have three other parts, which are called the body, the mind, and the spirit. So these three features of how the world works can be cultivated by Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, and any other kind of mind-body practice that is, shall we say, focused on personal cultivation and enhancing one's physical and mental, emotional, and spiritual integration. So there's a period there, but I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, I think you answered it great.
That was amazing.
I'm curious. I'm curious, and just to go back to your timeline, because I do want to get into some more specific questions about Qigong, Tai Chi,
Sure.
the benefits, how to do it, the
Oh,
benefits, all that kind
here,
of stuff.
let's do this before we go. The difference between Qigong and Tai Chi. First, let's say the difference between Qigong, Tai Chi, and yoga. Answer: no difference. Why? Because they all focus on the body, the breath, and the mind. So in that way, they are all the same. They're just iterations of the same idea. So then, why do we call yoga yoga and Qigong Qigong? Because they come from different cultures doing the same thing. So then why is Tai Chi singled out to get a special name for itself, while all the rest of Qigong is just a big pile, a huge pile of beautiful systems of practice that have all kinds of names, like practices that mirror the movements of animals, practices that mirror the movements of the stars, practices that are devoted to revealing the unique qualities of the seasons on what in China it's called the Taoist medicine wheel. How do you plot the seasons on the Taoist medicine wheel, and what kind of gestures would one do to celebrate the spring and the summer and the winter and the fall and the winter? So in that way, these are all the same. So, but the question is, but wait, in China they have these two things. What's the difference? Well, a very simple version of the difference is that Qigong is intended to be very associated with managing consciousness. And therefore, what it does is that it invites the person, the practitioner, to slow down, clear the mind of complex socioeconomic concerns and considerations, and by doing so, reach a deep state of disassociation from distressing complexity. And so what that does is have a very, very, very powerful influence on the autonomic nervous system. Soothing the autonomic nervous system is probably, if we look at chronic disease, soothing the autonomic nervous system or bringing the autonomic nervous system into harmonious homeostasis is probably the solution to somewhere around 95% of all chronic disease. And frankly, all infectious disease. Because if you're not panicking and you know that you have an innate immune system, then when you're confronted with colds and flus and viruses and so forth, your job is to simply turn on the immune system by disassociating from fear and complexity. So Qigong, very powerful, easy entry, because the gestures are almost all bilateral, meaning that the movement gestures are, the two hands are going to be doing the same thing at the same time. Easy to learn. And usually in Qigong, you're either sitting or standing. There are some forms of walking Qigong, but mostly sitting or standing, doing gestures with both arms that are doing very similar things. So easy to learn, easy to relax, and therefore enhancing the function of the parasympathetic functionality, which is basically to turn on the choline-based neurotransmitters like endorphin and serotonin and oxytocin, the resting and regenerating neurotransmitters or the healing neurotransmitters. Tai Chi, on the other hand, each hand is almost always doing something different, and it's a walking method. So not only are we going to have the added complexity of non-bilateral arm gestures, but we're also going to be doing walking gestures, meaning that one foot is going to carry the weight while the other foot goes somewhere. And then that foot is going to carry the weight while the other foot goes somewhere. So it's a highly complex. And so its primary benefit is brain plasticity maximization. Qigong, easier to turn on the inner healing resources by maximizing the parasympathetic functionality. And Tai Chi, because of its raised requirements for coordination, have the definitive effect of brain plasticity maximization. So these are really two very powerful contributors to health and well-being that are pretty unique, and yet they bleed into each other quite a bit.
So if you hang on one sec there. So if you stay on that continuum, Qigong, Tai Chi, how you just said they both fit together, then just add in the yoga part for us.
Same. So the yoga is going to be, if we wanted to really put it into like a basket that everybody can understand how they're the same, it's setting aside time to disassociate from complexity. So in that way, if you're on the quiescent side, meditation, or you're all the way over on the Kung Fu side, which has its mirror practice in yoga world that I just don't remember the name of. So all of those are setting aside time to disassociate from the complexity of life, and therefore yoga and Qigong and Tai Chi are different looking methodologies of accomplishing the same thing, which if you took it all the way to the baseline, it would be set aside time to disassociate from the complexity of life in order to maximize well-being and to discern the difference between what can be controlled and what cannot be controlled. And a lot of people who are not familiar with meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong live with the pain of the fact that they haven't realized the difference between what can and what cannot be controlled. And they spend a lot of time angsting rather than becoming more resilient, because in the presence of increasing volume of that which cannot be controlled, the goal for every citizen should be to maximize resiliency.
So I want to go back and sort of summarize the way I interpret a lot of what Roger's been sharing is Qigong and prana, very similar aligned in sort of conscious breathing awareness and feeling that in your body as a means to focus, as a place to sort of develop some agency for where
Mm,
you are, no matter where
agency.
you are, where you're at, right?
Agency is good. Like
Roger,
a
as you say, I think you refer in the book, The Healing Power of Qi, the breath is sort of the handle, right? You sort of get your sort of your hand on where you're at, like literally and physically, literally and figuratively. Tai Chi, the more movement aspect, so similar to Vinyasa, Ashtanga type movement yoga, right? There's a moving around, a greater awareness of how you're feeling in the body. The physical aspect helps you kind of drop in more on what you're feeling and noticing. One of the distinctions I feel like I hear more and I'm picking up more, Roger, in your book and just your perception of things with Qigong versus maybe how prana is thought of, is Qigong can also be thought on a very deeper cellular level for having a role and an influence on the flows, the flows within our body. Blood flow, neural distribution, breath work. And it's not to say that prana doesn't have the same intention. I think just the way Qigong is spoken about in the Chinese medicine world is that you really can start uh, checking in with where you're at, your level of homeostasis, and really start to cultivate a sense of um, influence and agency with just the way your body is being. And, Roger, I just feel like there's so much more around connecting with the chi. And as you say, those frequencies and really just working that alone in the body, not even before you stand up in your first Tai Chi posture.
Wow, yeah. So beautiful, love it, and thank you. And I hope that the brothers here on Guys Talking Yoga, kind of tune in to this the phraseology that you used, and then allow me to just say that for some reason the Chinese everything has come under research scrutiny more than the yoga paradigm. I'm not sure why. yoga got here early, and through our relationship with some of the great masters, Paramahansa Yogananda, and who I mean, what's not to love about Paramahansa? One of my favorite teachers, Yogi Bhajan, from what do they call
The
that?
Kundalini.
The Kundalini
Yep.
side of things. And then who's the Om Shanti guy? Darn it, he's my favorite one. I'll remember in a minute when I stop
It'll
talking
pop
about it.
up.
But because of the fact that the pretty much the Hindus, although we could say that not every spokesperson for yoga who came to the Western world was a Hindu, but many were even Muslims actually. There was a kind of cultural reverence for the yoga paradigm, which was basically, you got to talk prana. You just can't don't get busy with any other kind of thing, because these revered speakers on this subject have said, this is what you say. This is the words to use. Whereas with the Chinese, I don't know. I actually, I think I'm a part of how this happened in the United States. But in China, they do the same thing. The whole idea of getting busy with, the lymph system and the, vascular system and the neurotransmitters and so forth, that's all qi. That's all qi. And it's always all qi in China. But when you bring it to the United States, I think that the sacred cow, if we could say, of the language frame came under immediate scrutiny by myself and others to be able to translate what qi means into the language of America, because that's where I live. And I think this kind of spun out pretty quickly into all the European countries and so forth. And one of the kind of cool things that we realized, and that I think you'll probably agree is true about prana as well, is that if we had to find one word that makes sense to describe qi and prana, and by the way, cosmological resource is not a word that would typically be used. So we need to find one word that is reasonably widely understood by humans. And my favorite is function. So if you look at prana, what is it doing? Well, it's infused into everything. Well, okay, so what is a body doing? A body is functioning. What is a plant doing? A plant is functioning. What is a solar system doing? A solar system is functioning. So we can use this word function as an analog for both qi and prana. So then if you look into, well, what is function? Because shall we say, the supposition is that qi is involved in everything. So if we looked at the function of the heart, we would be looking at what are the functional correlatives or analogs for what a heart does. A brain, what is the prana function? How is the prana infusing the brain functioning? And then we can ask the question, well, what does the brain do? And the brain has all these little wirings and so forth. It's got blood delivery to it. It has lymphatic. It has a very, very special lymphatic system. The brain has its own, what is called I forget the name of it, but it's the brain's own version of a lymphatic system. So all of these things, it, in my mind, I, as a person from Cincinnati, Ohio, who studied medical school long enough to have done a cadaver, and then I studied to get into Chinese medical school, I had to study a cadaver again. And then when I studied at a massage school in Ohio, check this out, to get a massage license in Ohio, the training is 2,000 hours. When I moved to California, you could get a massage license for 100 hours. So, I
Jesus.
did cadavers again, and, it was involved in anatomy and physiology again and again and again through all of that. And so I took it on myself because people would say, well, this is like a religion. I can't get into this. I'm either anti-religious and don't want to get into this, or I'm a Christian and I don't want to get into this, or I have a Judaic background and this sounds like voodoo from the other end of the Silk Road. I don't want to get into this. So I took it upon myself to actually my PhD thesis in Chinese medical school was basically the physiology of Qi. And so I was very interested in making these links. So, okay, so what would happen if you breathe deeper? Chinese and the yoga would say it would be good for you. So then, and it's a part of how you increase function. So then I would say, well, okay, if breathing deeper increases function, what is the physiology of how that function increase occurs? And there's all kinds of, oh my God, it's like amazing. I mean, I'll just ramble for a moment. If you take a deep breath, dropping your diaphragm and expanding your belly, call that a belly breath, that has a huge acceleration function on the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system has two functions. One is to circulate immune cells, and the other is to discharge waste products. So when you take a belly breath, you are accelerating the pumping mechanism of discharging metabolic byproducts at the same time as diffusing immune cells. A marvel. Then if you take a chest breath, so now a belly breath, then a chest breath, what happens there? Well, there's a mechanism in the lungs called the stretch receptors. There's a mechanism in the vascular system and around the heart, which is called the
Baroreceptors?
baroreceptors. Thank you
Yep.
very much. So triggering the baroreceptors and the stretch receptors does not happen if you're just doing average breathing. So when you fill your chest and even hold your breath for a few minutes or a few moments, what happens is that it starts sending mechanical messages into the neurological system, into the brain, releasing choline-based neurotransmitters, which are the foundation of the parasympathetic self-recovery system. So the people in yoga people who were bringing yoga to the world didn't talk about that too much. People who were bringing Tai Chi to the world didn't really talk about that too much. But what I found was that if I could use that functional language to describe what it is when you do the things that you do when you're doing these practices, that it would increase the likelihood that a person could grasp, and not that they necessarily needed to understand the physiology, but just if I said lymph system, immune cells, and discharging metabolic waste, they could grasp that.
Yeah.
And if I said chest breath sends messaging into the neurological system that releases parasympathetic neurohormones, which are the foundation of the self-healing capacity of the human system, that would make sense to a person. And then they would say, oh, Well, I've heard those words before. I don't need to be an expert in physiology. I just need to know that this guy who's saying this thing is somewhat of an expert in physiology, and that the things that he's saying are probably true. Therefore, I'm now excited about doing yoga.
Well, this reminds me of
Mm.
Arnold Schwarzenegger used to say that when he was doing a bicep curl, he would try to imagine his brain in his muscle. He would think about imagining his connecting his brain into his bicep muscles, right? The two heads of the bicep. And at its highest level, it's like, well, you're mindfully focusing on that. But if you're thinking of qigong, you're thinking of all of the blood flow, the neurotransmitters, the lymphatic system moving that stuff around. And I think, and Larry and I have talked before about, especially with our good friend Johnny, about how to use some of these techniques and thought processes when you're working out, when you're in the gym, when you're out for a run, how to use these types of approaches and thinking. Um, as I shift back to the practice, I think Roger, you were kind of talking earlier about, stepping away from, and I can't remember exactly the words you said, but you were sort of saying the practice of stepping away from the complexities of life and having
Mm.
a practice, whether it's
Yep.
doing Qigong, Tai Chi, or whether or not you've rolled out your yoga mat and you're just kind of flowing through a vinyasa flow. You're not on your iPhone. You're probably not listening to the cable news.
Yep.
Hopefully you are checking in with yourself. And I
Yeah.
think I think where I think there's a great parallel in both yoga and Tai Chi Qigong, and there's also that simple practice. And one of the things that keeps popping up in the book you talk about is having this intention, this sincerity. It needs to be more than just wanting to go exercise or roll out the mat. There's a conscious awareness, and it's neat to see how that exists in both those types of cultures and those practices. And I'll throw that back out to you, Roger, as far as something that I'm picking up on all this stuff and
Yeah.
something that I think guys need to tune into.
So I like your checking in thing, because what it does is it gives us the opportunity to, think about what that means, and then also think, well, what does it mean checking out? And so if I'm checking in, I'm not, if I'm checking internally, I'm not checking externally. And I think that's a Tai Chi. Checking in is the opposite of checking inward is the opposite of checking outward. So am I basing who I am on what's out there, or am I basing who I am on what's in here? And yoga is the discipline of checking out what's in here. And if you've read Patanjali, you know that when we get to the latter chapters, the ability to, in an unobstructed way, associate with the aspect of myself, which is not the body, not the mind, but actually the transcendental aspect of being, will, number one, provide us with a refuge in the midst of complexity, but it will also be almost like a portal into the aspect of myself which is invincible, that cannot be destroyed. A body can be destroyed, and a body of information or a personality can depreciate and disappear. But there's something, we suppose, relative to the shamanic and religious traditions of every culture, that there's something that's enduring, that may or may not remember that it had a body, or I don't know the details on that. But this whole idea of checking in, and having a methodology for checking in, which means putting down my phone and not judging myself in relationship to the world, or even not even judging myself relative to that which I aspire to,
Hmm.
as soon as I'm kind of like back to it and I pick my phone up and now I'm saying, like sell gold, buy crypto, whatever it is, um, it's a Tai Chi. And that Tai Chi, that checking inside of the Tai Chi can take us into the portal to our invincibility as an eternal being, whereas checking out into the world, there's no evidence over there, there's no activity over there. There's maybe like you can go to church and you can read philosophy books and so forth, but they're all going to say to get into the portal you got to check in. So I think you framed that really well, and I hope my comeback was useful.
Absolutely. Larry, do
Yeah.
you want to hit?
I'm just taking it all in, and I find it fascinating. And I have a couple things that I wanted to ask you, and that is, on a practical level, okay, for our listeners and for guys out there, it's hard enough to get a guy to walk into a yoga studio, right? And I'm curious, how do you sell something like, and maybe this is a terrible way to ask this, Roger, so I apologize, but like, how do you sell something like Tai Chi or Qigong to your average American male when it's hard enough to get him on a yoga mat, right? And he walks by a park and they're not as open minded, let's say, as you are, seeing a group of people moving slowly, floating, as you said, which is awesome. If you've seen it, which I have seen it, it does look pretty awesome. But you know what I mean? Like, how do you, yoga can be such a physical thing. Like that could be the gateway in for people. And then, if anyone who's practiced enough yoga, once you do it consistently enough, it's going to start to take effect. But there's that initial sort of outward thing of the physical practice that looks like, oh, okay, I could do that. It's a push up or whatever it is, right? So how do you translate that into the Qigong thing or Tai Chi
Yeah.
to let guys know, like, hey, this can inform your yoga, it can inform your workout, and can really inform your life, obviously.
What I would say about the yoga thing is that, if I was pitching to guys, I would say, put everything aside except for one thing, and that is, what do you want? And guys are going to say, I want to be successful. I want to power up. I want to have more energy. I want to figure out how to do fasting. I want to get the edge on whatever it is that I want to get the edge on. And so I think that the pitch to the guys is to find a way into yoga that uh, you feel comfortable with. And because of the nature of the internet, you go to Google and you put in yoga session or something like that, and there's going to be like thousands of them that you can kind of check into and play along with in the comfort of your own home for as long as you want to before you go to a yoga class. And by the way, you may never go to a yoga class because there are all kinds of cool repositories of yoga classes that you can get online, if not from Google, from YouTube, then from, all of those. I won't mention names but that there are many of
Yeah.
these, access yoga classes sorts of things. So
Yeah.
that's guys and yoga. And the question is, what do you want? And what people want is to be able to be better. They want to be faster. They want to be stronger. They want to be more energetic. They want to be able to think things through more quickly. They want to win. They want to get on top. They want to have the edge. So all those, if you're a guy teaching yoga and you want to teach guys, then just replay the list of words that I just said. because
Yeah.
that's what people want. And you will get that from having a yoga practice. So now let's go to Qigong and Kung Fu. Same, except for in China, there's this ace, and the ace is Kung Fu. So how I would pitch Qigong and Tai Chi to buff guys who don't want to be seen as sissies or whatever you want to call it, I would say, let's do Kung Fu. Well, how do I do that? Well, my last suggestion for people on Kung Fu is to go to a Kung Fu class. My first suggestion is go to YouTube and just notice that there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of versions of Kung Fu. So watch for a few minutes, then go into your living room or into your front or backyard or into wherever you go when you go somewhere in nature, and see if you can just remember not exactly what people were doing, but more like the mood that they were in. Because Kung Fu is fast, and Kung Fu is strong, and Kung Fu is super flexible, with all kinds of turn all the way around and get the bad guy, and then turn all the way around and get the bad guy. There's all kinds of really cool twisting, turning, kicking, all the real guy stuff going on there. And so I think that the best pathway in for guys who are unfamiliar, who we want to pitch Qigong and Tai Chi to, is to pitch them Kung Fu. But we would do the same thing. We'd say, what do you want? Well, I want more energy. I want to be more clear-minded. I want to be a winner. I want to have the edge. I want to be able to make better decisions. I want to be stronger. I want to be more flexible. I want to be more resilient. And just take that list and put it in your marketing, because that's what Kung Fu is. I mean, those are the words that would appeal to the guys.
So
What do you think?
I think it's a great way to present sort of the benefits that you seek, X, Y, and Z. You can get there through these arts like yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong. One of the things that I noticed with Tai Chi, and I don't do a lot of Tai Chi, but I have had a lot of injuries over the years, which is why I found you up at Kripalu in 2018 when you were teaching a 5-day intro Tai Chi Qigong workshop. Was I had a lot of hip and back and leg issues, and I really had lost the sense of balance and feel in my body. And there was so much tension and chronic stress in my body. I had come to that workshop to try to learn another way to access the underlying sense of feel that I didn't have. And I think there was so much there, it was hard to access these new things right out of the gates back then. But one of the things I realized now is, now that I have greater mobility in my hips and in my knees and in my feet and my ankles, it's crazy tiring doing something on a slower scale like a Tai Chi, or even a longer pose in yoga, especially a standing pose. Because if you start to have greater mobility in your foot, all the bones and arches in your foot, you realize how weak you are in some places. And so, Roger, I want to ask more specifically, how does Tai Chi kind of help you sharpen the saw as far as having greater strength in your feet, in your ankle, your knees, your hips, your back?
Well, I think it's the same way that any other kind of practice does the thing that you're describing. So if we were going to go to a physical therapist, there would be some kinds of input that might be like a massage or something that you receive from the physical therapist, much of which one can apply to oneself. That's why Qigong has body practice, breath practice, mind practice, and massage practice. The massage of the ears and the hands and the feet those are methods for how to be able to massage the hip on the ear. how to be able to massage the hip on the hand, how to be able to massage or have an influence on the hip through foot massage. And then the other thing that would happen with physical therapy is they would give you exercises. So now you're doing exercises. Are they yoga? Well, yeah, of course they're yoga. I mean, what is it that makes yoga yoga is that it's from India and that's what they call it there. What is it that makes Qigong different than physical therapy? Well, because Qigong is the part of physical therapy that the physical therapy practitioner suggests that you do between now and your next physical therapy visit. And so these practices are all of them. Okay, let's go to train. Like I tune into Joe Rogan occasionally, and one of the things that comes on at the beginning is this thing that says, "Train all day, learn all night." Like it's like so. There's this thing about training. Well, what is training? Training is body, mind, spirit. So what do we do for the body? Well, whatever we want to do at the time: lift weights, use bands, do yoga, do kung fu. When you're standing, of course, you are working with all of the uh, uh, proprioceptive capacity to navigate from one foot to the other. It's happening all the time in yoga. It's happening all the time in Tai Chi. It's happening all the time in Kung Fu. It even happens a lot shifting side to side, weight bearing, one foot, all that in Qigong. So I think that what we've kind of got to get over is the whole idea that these things are special in some way other than the fact that they come from a culture which has named them a certain way and then acculturated them in certain ways. But if we pull the kind of pull off the cloak of acculturation, what do we have is body practice, mind practice, breath practice, and massage as the four dimensions of any kind of mind body practice from any culture. So then if we drill into like, well, but what? Like what? Well, you got a neurological system that's you've got a consciousness which making choices. Those choices then get directed. My choice is to sit and watch TV. Okay, there's whatever comes out of that. And then my choice is to do yoga. Okay, then there's whatever comes out of that. Then I'm going to do yoga that is more aggressive because I want to. Then we get whatever comes out of that. Oh, that was too aggressive. Okay, so I'm going to back off and I'm going to get whatever comes from that. And I'm going to put my body into these positions as I learn them or see them or read about them or hear someone else using them or see a YouTube on this gesture and that gesture and all these other gestures. I'm going to use consciousness to be able to make a decision, to be able to say, well, this is what I'm going to do next. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to focus on what I'm doing so that I'm not checking out, but instead I'm checking in. And so I think your question really leads to this kind of disguise that is, very typical and totally understandable, that suggests that the physical therapy, yoga, and all the Chinese mind-body traditions are somehow different, and they're not. What do you think?
I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
I think that's spot on. Well, tell you what, Roger, this has been great. I know we're going to get you back again in the new year because I think there's a lot of great places to really drill into some of this stuff. This was really meant to be for our listeners an introduction to you and an introduction to Qigong and Tai Chi. So
My
thank you
pleasure.
very much for joining us.
Wow, it's been awesome. Love you guys, love your audience. Dudes, I'm pointing right at you. Like, Uncle Sam does when he's going to put you in the army. Dudes, get with it. Power up. Become resilient. Be ready. Launch yourself into the winner's game. Get the edge. Turn on the medicine within. Power up. Do yoga.
Amen. Thank you, Roger. This was great.
That was
I
awesome.
wish you well.